Hello, this is Mike Madden and you're listening to the Arts Show podcast. Here you will find interviews with artists, musicians, authors and anyone else in and around the arts. Some of the interviews are recorded direct from the Arts Show on Expat Radio, with one or two specials in between. This show features French-based author Erica Laine talking about the third book in her trilogy, The Tangled Queen. It was first broadcast on Expat Radio on Monday the 11th of February 2019. Due to licensing restrictions, we were unable to play the music from the original broadcast. Good evening again, Dave. How are you?
I'm very well, sir. I'm very well. I was just very much... I was chilling out to that, actually. It was very relaxing. It was a nice song, that. Have you heard it?
I have indeed heard it. I've heard it live.
I think you were singing on there. I'm sure you were.
Good evening again, everybody. This is Mike Madden on the Arts Show on Expat Radio, and my guest on the second half of the show, it's welcome back to Erica Laine.
Hello there.
How are you, Erica? How is it in sunny France?
Well, believe it or not, we've had some sunshine today after weeks of rain. The sun is finally coming out.
And you know, we are exactly the same. We've had sunshine over the rolling Peak District hills. It's been wonderful.
Yes.
You came on a few months ago to talk about The Tangled Queen Part 2, but now
yes.
Isabella of Angoulême, The Tangled Queen Part 3 is out. So just give the listeners a little bit of a synopsis of the story so far and what we can expect in Part 3.
Well, in Part 3, which is the end of the trilogy, Isabella is a powerful woman with a good second marriage, which is giving her everything she wants. But she wants more, and she's being threatened now by the French royal family, who at that time really owned a very little bit of France as far as territory was concerned, and they begin to make moves down into the southwest. And what she does is she calls on help from her son, who's King Henry III, and he comes over to try and help her fight back. And that is the kernel of the story, but an awful lot else goes on as well. There's quite a lot of exploration of Henry as a young king, and he's almost as tangled up as his mother. At that time, the thrones of England and France, territories in France belonging to England, made it all very complicated for loyalties, very divided loyalties.
And you tell a fantastic story there, and I think we ought to clarify for the listeners, this is actually historical fiction and not fact. But I've seen some of the reviews of your earlier books, and it's a very fine line between the fact and the fiction. So just go back a little bit and explain how you came across Isabella and where the story came from.
Well, it is historical fiction, but it is based on fact. I mean, I haven't invented any historical happenings. The majority of them actually happened. But how I came across Isabella is I live 40 minutes from Angoulême, and I was studying with a winter study group history of France. We were doing the history of Normandy, which her husband, King John, bad King John, he of Magna Carta, lost. He lost it to the French, and Normandy was so rich, and there were so many Anglo-Norman barons who were very cross with him when he lost it. But the chroniclers blamed Isabella. They said it was because he'd married this young, feisty, passionate woman, and that he wasn't really paying much attention to what his role as a king was. This, of course, is the usual thing, let's blame the woman. But he in fact was a bad leader of men in battle, and he turned tail and ran away. So that's how I discovered her. I thought she is from just up the road. What is her story? So I began to research it, and I wrote book 1 and published it, self indie publishing. And then I started to write book 2, and it just got longer and longer and longer. And everyone was sort of throwing up their hands in horror and saying, "This is much too long, much too long. You're going to have to cut it in half."
And when you first started, did you think it was going to be a trilogy, or?
No, I just thought it was going to be book 1 and 2. And then I discovered that the story got more intriguing, and I needed to write more about the sort of inner lives of these people. I couldn't just make it, events. It had to be all sorts of other things as well. So I did create other characters who were not historically present at the time. So there are created characters, but the majority of them are people who really lived at that time. And in my research, I found out quite a lot about them and about the area that I live in the region I live in Aquitaine. Things like the siege of La Rochelle, things like towns that are on the A10, the N10, that goes from Bordeaux to Paris, which existed at the time of Isabella. They're full of history. So there was plenty to look at, plenty to research, to get some good historical background. But then you've got to create conversations, meetings, the meals they had, the clothes they wore, to give it a richness, to give it some depth.
And I guess that it really is proper research, because you can't just sort of pick some characters and have them eat in 20th century meals. You have got to do some really, really solid research to get to those facts. And it would apply to the places as well. So did you tour around the area to make sure everything was just as you would want it to be?
Well, I did. I didn't go to everywhere because there were too many, but I went to Lusignan, which is where Isabella's second husband came from. He was one of the lords of Lusignan. The castle they lived in has gone. It's only a ruin, but it was good to get the impression of it. I went to Fontevraud, which is where she is buried, alongside Henry II, Eleanor of Aquitaine, Richard III. They're all buried there, and so is Isabella. I went obviously to La Rochelle, which is an interesting port in its own right. I went to Saintes, which is where some important battles went on, to Taillebourg, where there is a bridge that still commemorates the battle that took place there in 1242. These are all factual places where things happened, but to go and look at them and get an idea of their history, and you can still walk streets that are almost medieval.
And with all this research and having to be faithful to the past, how does your writing process work? Did you just let it flow, or do you have to constantly refer to history books?
Well, I have huge number of notebooks that I made notes in. As I researched, I would write things down that really caught my eye, or I would be forever writing down dates and making sure that I'd got chronology right. And then when you start piecing it together, I started thinking about the people as people without bringing sort of 21st century psychology to bear on them. I started thinking, well, yes, I can't give them a motivation which is of our time. They were in it for politics and power, and they were very ruthless about it. Life in those days was quite brutal. You didn't mince your words if you didn't like someone, and people were not very loyal. But then the whole concept of loyalty didn't exist at that time. You could sign up and say that you were going to be have this man as your overlord, and you could say yes, but just for a couple of years, and then after that I might just switch allegiance. So all of that's going on as well. Everybody was looking out for themselves, really, in a very obvious way.
One of the things that we get a few authors on this show, and one of the things that they say is that writing a series is difficult in that you have to have the continuity from one book to the next. And quite often, they keep details of colours of eyes and that kind of thing. But I guess writing a series where you're walking the line between historical fact and fiction must be even more difficult.
Well, it is tricky. In fact, in the end, I had a grid where I had to keep this sort of information very codified. Otherwise, I would have forgotten. And there were times when I thought in book 2, when I was writing book 3, I thought, hey, didn't I say that he looked like that? I better go back and check and make sure that there is a continuity and I haven't changed someone's eye colour or their height or something like that. So, yes, you have to do that. The other thing is, because I wrote and book 2 became book 2 and 3, I had to write new closing chapters and new beginning chapters. And that actually, the nice thing about the series was that it gave you a chance to refer back to things that had happened, to remind the reader of something that had happened earlier, which is now either has become important now or is just worth reminding them about as we follow this character through. So that was quite good fun, suddenly having a reference I could use. But yes, and the other thing about writing a series is you think, well, I don't know, is it going to work? Is this third book going to work? And it's all a bit daunting.
I think that from what you describe, it is quite an arduous task. Which came first to you in terms of history or writing?
Oh, writing, I suppose, but I haven't written creatively since I left school. I mean, I've written all my working life, and I've written textbooks when I lived in Hong Kong for primary school, Chinese primary school children, which was quite creative in its own way. But to come away from the world of writing reports and talks and conference papers and all that sort of thing into being able to write creatively was a wonderful liberation, to deal with emotions, to deal with feelings, to put people together in a scene and see what happens. That was really exciting.
I think that writing is a great outlet, and it does actually shape you in some way. We're going to go to a quick break now with Shape of You, the Ed Sheeran song, but this one is an unusual version because it is the Undlove Youth Choir from Africa. Thanks, Dave. Right. And this time he really is back.
Yes, I'm back. I'm under starter's orders. Did you hear that version of that song?
No, we were chatting amongst ourselves.
Oh, well, you see, I've sent it to the both of you so you can hear it a bit later on, so you'll enjoy it.
Thank you very much for that, Dave. I really enjoyed creating a link for that one.
You're more than welcome. I thought I'd throw you up in the air with that one.
This is Mike Madden on the Arts Show on Expat Radio, and tonight my guest is Erica Laine. Hello again, Erica.
Hello there.
And before the break, we were talking about Isabella and your historical fiction, but there's perhaps an explanation for your sort of wandering ways in France, because you've led quite a varied life, including part of it was in Hong Kong.
Yes, I was in Hong Kong for 20 years, which was quite a big chunk of my life, actually. I went out in 1977 and came back in 97. And it was an amazing time. It was a wonderful time for Hong Kong, and we worked very, very hard, but it was very fulfilling. I worked for the British Council, and I started as a part-time teacher and ended up as a project manager for special projects, which was really, really exciting. These were, in the main, government-to-government projects for English language. So we were working with Chinese teachers who were going to teach English in schools there and offering them lots of support. So that was good.
And part of that was actually writing textbooks for the British Council, wasn't it?
Yes, my very first special project, which was, again, right at the beginning of my time there, was that we had a contract to write textbooks for Chinese primary schools. There was a new syllabus and new textbooks were needed, and we had to write for primary 1 to primary 6, year 1 to year 6. And we had to write 12 textbooks, teachers' notes, workbooks, guided readers. My goodness me, that was a project and a half.
And I guess with the difference between that, I mean, your creative writing is your historical fiction, but that must have given you a great discipline in terms of writing.
Oh, it certainly did, especially as you had very limited vocabulary to work with. In the early stages, everything was in the present tense. You couldn't, write in the past tense or anything else because the students hadn't learnt it. So you were having, with very limited straw, to make some very solid bricks. And that was a real challenge, to make it interesting, because I'm a firm believer in it's pretty rubbish to teach children to read or whatever, and the material you give them is so very boring, they wonder why they're bothering. So that was a challenge.
And you also trained as a speech and a drama teacher.
That's right.
And you've also had jobs including an actress and a beauty consultant.
Well, one led to the other. I went to a stage school in Tring and trained for the stage, for the theatre, and I worked at it for a little bit, but I really wasn't that good. I'd been good when I was 12. I really wasn't that good when I was 17. And so that led to me working as a beauty consultant, because my holiday job as a teenager had been to work in a shop that sold perfumes and cosmetics. So I thought I knew something about that. So I did that for a while. And then I retrained as a speech and drama teacher. And I also worked in libraries. So I was doing all sorts of things. But it was really Hong Kong that gave me, if you like, a steady idea of what I enjoyed doing. What I enjoyed doing was working with people, managing projects, heading up a team. We used to be very much a rapid response team. So it was exciting work. And then coming to France couldn't have been more different, because we're very rural. Not a lot goes on here unless you make it happen for yourself. And when I arrived, I had a writing project for Hong Kong, which kept me busy for a while at distance. And then I spent a lot of time making a garden. And then I discovered Isabella.
And then your life changed.
And then my life changed again. And I think now I have to sit and take stock and think, what am I going to do next? But I think what I'm going to do next is consolidate all these things I've set up, and really not start another new thing for a while.
Well, I know that you've got a lifetime collection of books. So who's in your book collection?
Who's in my book collection? Lots and lots of thrillers, because I read American thrillers, but lots of classics, lots of anthologies of poetry. I recently bought a new Penguin anthology of prose poetry, which is really fascinating, because the whole idea of prose poetry is an interesting one, and the book is proving to be very fruitful. I have lots of children's books left over from my own childhood, from my own children's childhood, and now my grandchildren are reading the books that their mothers read, which is rather nice. Lots of history books, lots of modern classics. I mean, I don't think there's a room in the house that hasn't got a pile of books in it somewhere.
I guess you might have a few gardening books in there as well.
I do. I have 2 shelves of gardening books. No, I lie. 3 shelves of gardening books. And I keep looking at them and thinking, but I'm not going to make a new garden again, am I? Perhaps I don't really need these. And then I can't quite bear to throw them away.
Well, getting back to Isabella, and part 3, is part 3 actually out there yet, or is it imminent?
No, it's out there now. It's obviously it's on Amazon and other online selling points. It's beginning I'm selling it here in France directly. I had a nice little book launch here, which went very well. It makes a lot of sense to people here because, of course, they, like me, are looking around and saying, oh, that's there. I know that place. Now I know what happened there. So I always sell directly in France. But yes, it's on Amazon. I must say Amazon US has been a bit slow about it, but then they sometimes are.
I know from personal experience that that's absolutely right. But we are running out of time, so we know where you can get your books. Tell the listeners where they can learn a little bit more about you.
You can learn about me. I have a website which is called ericalainewriter.com, and I do try and post on that as regularly as I can. I'm going to a workshop to learn how to do it better. And I also run a Facebook page, Erica Laine Author, which actually is dedicated to Isabella. So I put masses of images up there, maps, places around here, snippets from the books, information about her. So that's quite a fruitful page to look at if you're interested in history. So those are the two sites. I'm on Twitter, but on Twitter I'm a different person.
Aren't we all?
Yes.
Well, it's been wonderful talking to you again, Erica. The connection was much better than last time. I think you'll rather forget that one. But we hope you will come back again and tell us what your next project is when you decide what it is.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for asking me along.
Now, I did ask Dave to pull some Buddy Holly out, but he has failed in that. So you could actually say Miss You to Buddy Holly, because we're going to play the Rolling Stones and Miss You. You've been listening to the Arts Show podcast with Mike Madden. Come back soon for more artists, authors, musicians and anyone else connected with the arts. We're going to play out with Mike Sanchez and I Don't Stand a Chance.
And baby, you hiding something that you don't want me to know, because I'm getting a vibe from way down the side, like you're just about ready to go. And you can't tell me where you stayed last night, you just can't cope with treating me right. I'm on the road to heartbreak, now's the time to tell me so, because I'm getting a chill like I'm gonna be ill. I know you don't want me no more. I won't be satisfied with your little white lies. Girl, I've only just begun to realize I don't stand a chance. I don't stand a chance. You don't wanna know and I can't make you dance. Well, I said goodbye. Find yourself another guy. I wish you were mine, but I'm losing my mind. I don't stand a chance. This man on the road to heartbreak. Now's the time to tell me so, because I'm getting a chill like I'm gonna be ill. I know you don't want me no more. I won't be satisfied with your little white lies. Girl, I've only just begun to realize I don't stand a chance. No, I don't stand a chance. You don't wanna know and I can't make you dance. Well, I'll say goodbye. Find yourself another guy. I wish you were mine, but I'm losing my mind. I don't stand a chance.